If you like what we do here over at Aircraft Interview and would like to support us and help us grow, you can head over to our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Aircraft Interview, where you can donate monthly. We have different tiers ranging from $1 per month right up to $25, with each tier offering different rewards. All the monthly donations greatly help us to continue creating these video and audio interviews, so please take a look and I thank you in advance. Enjoy.
So Chris, when did you become interested in aviation?
So, hi Mike, yeah, my father was in the Air Force actually. So obviously I grew up in it, so it's always been in the background. But in particular, when I was living in RAF Akrotiri, I would see like F4s and F3s arriving back in the circuit when they're on APC. Also, I was lucky enough to be out there when the Red Arrows were out there at Springhawk. So I'd be sat in my classroom, and the next thing, a 9 ship of Hawks would go past the window. So really, I think it was kind of a fait accompli. I don't think I had much choice really. Also, again, very fortunately, I was out in Akrotiri about the same time that they started the flying club. So I was scraping together all the money I could get from odd jobs and from the bank of mum and dad and whatnot to try and get my pilot's license. So I did about 20 hours at the RAF Akrotiri Flying Club in a Cessna 152, I think it was, and then applied to the Air Force and was lucky enough to get a flying scholarship. So I took those 20 hours and then topped that up with another 20 from the flying scholarship, which ended up with me getting my PPL. So I had a PPL at 17 years old, which is fantastic, right? Apart from the fact I didn't actually have a driving license. So I had to be driven to the airfield so then I could take the person that was driving me flying.
Wow.
So yeah, I guess it really comes back to my childhood and my family really. So yeah, and also, Akrotiri's played a pivotal role in my life throughout, obviously being at school over there as well. And having headed back through there in the tornado, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, over the years, it's always kind of nice to go back home, right? So yeah, it's been there forever, really.
Absolutely. So can you tell us actually what you actually joined the RAF and some of the aircraft you started training on? Sure.
So I, again, due to my childhood, due to a complete lack of imagination, I decided I was going to go and join the Air Force rather than do anything else. So I started off on the East Midlands University's Air Squadron at RAF Newton back in 1995. So got 120 hours flying the Bulldog there. Great little aeroplane. In fact, I'm hoping to fly another one of those very shortly, which will be great fun. Then went to IOT, so Initial Officer Training, in 1998, before moving very fortunately, straight onto the Tucano at RAF Linton on Ouse. Now, the Tucano, again, is a great aeroplane. It's really hard. I find it really hard to fly it well.
Right.
Big engine. You give it the beans on the throttle, and the next thing you know, the aircraft's trying to depart the runway to the left because there's no automatic rudder. So it's pretty tricky. We used to say that the Hawk actually was a great lead-in to fly the Tucano. Fortunately, I did well enough on the Tucano, good enough, shall we say, back in 1999 to go to Valley. So I went over to Valley on the Hawk T1, initially on 208 Squadron. In 2000, I think it was, on 208 Squadron, where they teach you to fly the aeroplane. And you fly an airplane now, which is your first jet, and it's twice as fast as anything you've ever flown before. So twice as fast as the Tucano, and it's really easy for the jet to get away from you. But I was good enough to get through 208 Squadron, relatively unscathed, and then moved across the airfield to what was 19 Squadron back then, which was the TAC Weapons Squadron, so Tactical Weapons Unit, where you would then learn to drop bombs off the aeroplane, fire the gun. What was it also? The basic fighter maneuvers, air defence, and it culminated in the SAP phase, the simulated attack profile phase. That was a hard course. I had a bit of an extended stay at RAF Valley back in the day due to the fact that I was acutely airsick, and the Air Force, in its wisdom, sent me off to Farnborough, to do a desensitisation course. So I spent a month at Farnborough. Getting made sick, then a month of Boscombe down in the back of a Hawk, getting made sick, which then actually helped me get through the course. At the beginning of the course, interestingly enough, you get taken in as you call. I think I had about 10 people on the course. 10 guys on the course, and they ask you, where do you want to go? What jet would you like to fly? And what's your top 3? So mine was Harrier, Jag, and then the GR1. So obviously I was very mud orientated, not AD orientated. And it was well known back in the day, and I don't know what it's like now, but certainly back in the day, that the AD phase, so the air defence phase on 19 Squadron, was absolute nails. And you could be a hero on the Monday, and you could be chopped by Friday on that course.
Wow.
It was brutal. I scraped myself through AD, just good enough, but I was definitely never destined to be an air defence guy. So at the end of the course, I was fortunate enough to be posted to the GR1 OCU, 15 Squadron at Lossiemouth, and I arrived there in 2001. Flying training, fortunately for me, minimum holding. I think I got to the OCU, I'm not wrong, I think I got to the front line on the Tornado 3 years after I finished officer training. So I was a 25-year-old, I think, so very lucky.
So Chris, can you talk us through some of your ground and flying training on the Tornado?
Sure. So up at Lossiemouth, 15 Squadron, arrived there in the summer, and day one of ground school, we were taken over to meet our course commanders and then taken over to see the jet and have the course photo, right? And I tell you, my first thought, so we're standing in front of this aeroplane, with my first thought, I'm standing looking at this thing, and it is big. And I think to myself, I don't think I can do this. I'm 24 years old, I think, and I'm standing there thinking, I don't think I can fly this aeroplane. It's massive. I mean, it's got movie wings. It's got drop tanks on it. There's a whole bunch of weapons to learn about. I mean, the engines have got reheat. I mean, I've just managed to scrape myself through a Hawk course. I'm looking at this thing. This is impossible. Then, of course, we start on the ground school, and that was 8 weeks, I think, 8 weeks of ground school, and that consisted of learning all the systems, learning how to fly the aeroplane, obviously, learning about the avionics. But just to give you an idea of the differences. So the Hawk has a set of FRCs, so flight reference cards, pretty thin. There's some emergencies in it. They're reasonably extensive, but not massive, and all the checks tell you how to start the aeroplane and do all various things you need to do it. And it has one pilot operating handbook, so an aircrew manual, and again, that's not overly massive. The Hawk is a relatively straightforward aircraft. The Tornado has 4 sets of FRCs, okay, 4 sets, and it has 2 aircrew manuals. These things are like War and Peace. So this was no small undertaking by any stretch. So 8 weeks of ground school, and that culminated in, I think, 8 simulators, where we would learn all the procedures getting into and out of Lossiemouth. We would learn, the handling characteristics of the aeroplane, learn, where you needed to move your hands, to move wings and flaps and gear and all that sort of thing. And also we were learning all the emergency drills, so as many as we could. To get the basic levels of knowledge and ability prior to going to doing the live flying. So 8 weeks after starting, we move across the airfield from ground school, which is the south side, to 15 Squadron, and we're going to go flying in this thing. And I'm still a bit nervous, I'm not going to lie. And we get out to the aeroplane for the first time, and again, doing the walk round. I'm being shown the walk round by another pilot. So the first 8 sorties, I think it was 8 or 10 sorties, were for the pilots, twin stickers. So there's another pilot in the back in a trainer aircraft with 2 sticks, and essentially you're going to convert me to be safe to fly the aeroplane. So I can fly the aeroplane, I can get into and out of the airfield. I know when to move the wings, all that sort of stuff. And I've got an instrument rating. So the idea of that first bit, the pilot conversion bit, gets the pilots to actually be able to basically fly the aircraft. So we did that in around 8 to 10 trips, and then we move on from that into doing the rest of the course. And the rest of the course involves going to the range quite a bit. It involves going to do pairs work, so pairs formation, hitting targets around Scotland, obviously for pretend, and culminates in what we call, the op phase, so a bounced sortie. So you've got 2 aircraft going out there, led by the student crew. We'll talk about that in a second, the student crew. And then there's a 3rd aircraft essentially trying to shoot them down. They have to then evade the threat. There's some simulated surface-to-air missiles out there as well. Evade the threat, hit the target, come back, debrief it, and that's your end of course check before you go to the front line. So that was the course. That took about 6 months. And it was pretty challenging. But the aircraft itself, I I remember first getting into it. Like I said before, this thing is big, right? So I'm climbing up the ladder into this thing, and the cockpit is huge, and there's dials and buttons and screens everywhere, and taxiing it out onto the runway. And the first time you put the burners in, it feels like you're getting thumped in the back. So you push the throttle through the reheat gate, and you get a kick on one side. And then you push the right throttle through, you get a kick on the other side. You double check the gauges that the burners are lit. You can see the gauges have come up, at which point you then accelerate down the runway, and this thing is going like the clappers. Now, it's no Typhoon and it's no F-15, so let's not make the mistake there. But for a guy, a 24-year-old, who has just finished flying a Hawk and is 8 weeks later now sat in a Tornado thundering down the runway, I was pretty impressed, and actually very much behind the aircraft, because as soon as you get airborne, you're getting airborne about 190 odd knots, right? The gear limiting speed is 235, so you've got to get the gear up, you get the flaps up before 280, then next thing you know, you're at 350 knots, so you've got to get the wings back, and all of these things are happening. It's like, So it's phenomenal. And as you can see by the smile on my face, I remember it well, and it was just such good fun, such a great aeroplane.
What would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the aircraft were, and how did you find the wing sweep? Was that in the weakness part or the strengths part?
So strengths and weaknesses of the jet. So remember, the jet was actually designed to go really, really fast at low level in a straight line, and it does that very well. So we used to, if I was taking a passenger flying, so in my later years on 31 Squadron or on 9 Squadron when I was at Marham, if you're taking a passenger, you generally go out over the North Sea, decelerate to about 250 knots, around about 500 feet, and then put the burners in, and then accelerate up to 550 knots, and then backstick it and climb up to about, 10,000 feet, whatever. And that was impressive. So going straight in a straight line with the wings all the way back, very, very good at that. Great acceleration. I remember running away from Harriers quite happily in Goose Bay. They just can't catch you because you go really, really quick. So that's fantastic. But of course, the aircraft's been operated not in that role in many conflicts over the years. So when you're at 20,000 feet with fully laden with 3 Paveway 4s and Brimstones and a pod, maybe even with big tanks, it just doesn't like to turn. So the main weakness is, the wings aren't. It's no Typhoon. So the wing is pretty poor in terms of actually getting around the corner at medium level. The wing sweep, of course, is there to help you do that. I wouldn't say it's a weakness or a strength necessarily. It's just a necessary thing given the design of the aircraft. But yeah, operating at medium level, it's a bit of a lumbering beast. At low level is where it holds its own, definitely.
And did you enjoy working with a nav?
So, a frontline squadron has generally around about 28 aircrew, maybe slightly less, about 14 pilots, 14 navs, or 12 and 12, something like that. And that actually makes for a great camaraderie. And working with someone in the back cockpit has been a fantastic experience. So great navigators made my life so much easier because they've got SA about the threat. They know exactly where the target is. They're sorting out stuff to do with the tanker. They're on the radio doing X, Y, and Z, and that's fantastic. So when the team works well, it's definitely greater than the sum of its parts by no shadow of a doubt. So it's fantastic. Also, we used to use them quite happily for bleeding the gearboxes on a landaway. So they can help you turn the jet round quite happily, so you don't need to get your hands dirty. Fantastic. And of course, if you get stuck somewhere, you've got an instant buddy to go to the pub with. So yeah, in general, I had a great time working with the navigators, yeah.
Brilliant stuff. So what was your first squadron? And can you share with our viewers an average day on like a frontline squadron when you're combat ready?
Sure. So my first squadron was 14 Squadron at RAF Lossiemouth, so just across the runway from the OCU. So I finished that, I think, on the Friday, started 14 on the Monday. That was fantastic. And in terms of an average day, when we get to, you arrive on the squadron, you do a combat ready workup in different guises. So once that is finished, then you're doing a lot of training. You're either doing workup sources for PERSI workups or 4-ship workups or Cameo workups or whatever that might be. We used to do a lot of work with the F3s out of Lucas, 43 Squadron and Treble 1. So we go off and have a fight with them almost on a daily basis. And looking at that, then we would come in to work, and it's Lossiemouth, right? So if it's in the winter, you're coming in about 4, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. So you want to be able to get airborne and make the most of the daylight. So that generally getting airborne around about 9 a.m. You'd arrive, have a met brief. Someone would set a scenario. So today we're going to go and hit X, Y, and Z targets in Redland, and it's defended by these F3s from Lucas. We're then going to hit these targets, come home. You've got these threats against you. So there's a lot of mental agility to start with in the planning process. And that would take around about an hour and a half to plan that, and you'd have your 4-ship, so your 8 people doing various different tasks within that plan. Then you'd have a 45-minute sortie brief. So generally, I as the pilot would be standing up, giving the sortie brief. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get in and out of the airfield. This is who we're going to go and fight on. These are the frequencies, all that sort of the basic domestic side of the house. And then we talk about the tactics, what we're going to do today, what the threat is, etc. We may even have a tanker as well. So often we'd pop off to the tanker as well. So then you walk out to the aircraft. That takes about another 45 minutes to get into the aircraft, start it up. Sometimes, of course, a tornado being a tornado in northern Scotland in the winter doesn't really like to start very well. So you might have to go for the jet, which adds an extra level of complexity and time pressure. And then you're airborne. Airborne off normally down to the borders or the west coast. The tornado's got decent legs, so we would sometimes go high, low, high, out of Lossiemouth, dropping into Otereco, so the Newcastle area, have a fight with a couple of F3s, let's say, and then bingo home. That would take about an hour and a half. Or if we had a tanker, then we go to the tanker, and basically go and have another fight maybe, and that would take about 2.5 hours. So it's an hour and a half airborne roughly, or 2.5 hours. Landing off that, so you gather the formation back together again, get on the deck, and then we've got a 45-minute debrief where we would go through all the domestics. Did we get out of the airfield safely? Did we get back safely? Were there any safety points around the route? You try to recreate the fights from memory. My essay at that point was the threat was over there, then we did this, and that worked or it didn't work or whatever. So you kind of validate in your tactics. Then we get the tapes out and go through each aircraft's video and check, did we hit the target? Was it in parameters for the weapons that we were using that particular day, simulated weapons, etc., etc. So let's take about 45-minute debrief. So the whole evolution from turning up to work, met brief, and everything I've just described is around about 7 hours for a normal practice frontline sortie.
And on that point with the F3s, you had a bit of a fight with them. Who would arrange it, or would it just be there in the area, and then do you just talk to each other and say fights on, or is it brief beforehand?
So we would brief beforehand, predominantly, particularly if we were doing affiliation. So you have an affiliation coordination meeting the week prior normally, and you'd have, okay, we've got 43 Squadron doing this X, Y, and Z, and these times are available. We would then try and marry up our times to make that work. And depending on what phase we're in, right? So if we're doing a lot of affiliation training with a fighter threat, then that really worked for us. If we're doing close air support training, for example, then we didn't need to do that because we'd be off to the range and we're working with the JTAC or whatever. So it just depended.
And I want to talk about your time at Red Flag and Maple Flag. Basically, let's talk about Red Flag first. What was it like? And is it essentially you put your name in, or the squadron put the name in? How does that squadron or the crew get chosen to go out there?
So the Air Force runs, I believe they still do, an air exercise plan. So the Air Force, as in big Air Force, so not at squadron level, will be bidding for various exercises around the world, such as Pitch Black in Australia. You've got Magic Carpet in Oman, Red Flag, Maple Flag, etc. And then out of that, when they get the AXP sorted and they've locked down the dates, then they will be allocated to certain squadrons. Now, I was never involved in the planning process for that, or the bidding process, or the bribing process to get out of the Red Flag. But I do know that in 2004, we were on the AXP to go to Red Flag, which I'd never done before, which is, of course, is very exciting. So we're going to go to Red Flag. What does that even look like? Well, what does it look like? It looks like us getting 9 aeroplanes, 9 Tornadoes out of Lossiemouth across to the States, which is no small undertaking because we needed 3 tankers. I think at the time we had a TriStar and 2 VC-10s, a Nimrod for search and rescue, just in case we ended up banging out ending up in the Atlantic, and Hercules, which carried a bunch of engineers and a load of our spares, just in case we got stuck somewhere. Ironically, that Hercules also carried my now ex-wife. So there you go. Who knew? So we then popped over. We went across from Lossiemouth into wrong. We went to Lossiemouth into the Azores. That's right. And then went from the Azores to Bangor, and then Bangor in Maine, so the top right hand corner of the States, and then down to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada for Red Flag. It wasn't without its issues, that trail. As we got into Bangor, as we pop out the bottom of the clouds, to discover that half the runway is covered in snow. Okay, that's fine. We landed okay, not a problem. The only issue then, of course, is it dumped about 8 feet of snow overnight, and all the jets were iced up. You couldn't get into them. Absolutely iced solid. So that put a couple of days delay on us getting down to Nevada. But then eventually, when we did get there, we've travelled from Bangor in Maine, which is, whatever the temperature was, 0, to Nellis, where it's like plus 15, plus 20 during the day. So the difference in the States is phenomenal, just in terms of the landmass. And arriving in Nellis, I remember I was flying with the boss. I led the trail. I was flying with the boss in the back, and we landed. And I said, I can see the strip. And he says, well, yeah, we're in Vegas. What did you expect? I said, well, I didn't know. And it was a very, very, very exciting time. Again, I'm 26 years old. I'm in Vegas with a fighter squadron with a whole bunch of other fighter squadrons. I think there was about 80 jets. 80
Wow.
jets for that Red Flag, something like that. It's nuts, really. So, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so before we get into the flying part of Red Flag, so the planning part, like, people probably don't think about it, but it must have been a logistical nightmare. Like, where do you sleep? Who's where? Who's this? Where's everyone at? How does that? I mean, are you involved in that planning as well? Is a whole team effort there?
Oh, massively, massively. So I think we would have taken all the crews. So that would have been, I'd say, about 24 air crew. We had a significant ops team who were fantastic. They did a lot of the hotel bookings and support that. We also had people from the station that came along as like the deployed support party. So they would have again helped with a lot of the planning, the logistical part of, these people are sleeping there, they're in that hotel, we need to hire cars, what time do we need to be there, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a whole force and a whole team effort. And not to mention the fact that, of course, we took all the engineers as well. It's about 150 engineers. So for a Red Flag, you're looking, I'd say, north of about 300 people, really, to go and support a squadron out in Red Flag. And yeah, logistics, the logistics of getting the airplanes there is one thing, right? But actually then you've got the logistics on the ground of the basic stuff of getting to work. Where do I need to be? What time do I need to be there? And we were running day flag and night flag. So I did nights. I did 2 weeks of nights, so flying NVGs low level at night. But that means that extends the day, which means you've got to get people in a position so that they can fly in the day wave and the night wave. So logistically, it's a significant challenge. But I have to say, it worked seamlessly, mainly down to not my work, but mainly down to all the hard work of the engineers and the support staff.
So yeah, Chris, let's talk about some of the flying you did at Red Flag. Was it low level, high level, medium level? And did you choose, or was it up to the US what they wanted you to do?
Yeah, so flying at Red Flag, we would do our own tactics. We were predominantly flying low level, where the Tornado is at its happiest. I flew 2 weeks of nights, so I was doing night vision goggle, 250 feet, low level ingress tactics, and with shallow dive profile. So we were dropping live 1,000-pounders at night from shallow dive profiles. So that was pretty impressive. Interestingly enough, we were the only players down in the 100 to 1,000 foot block, so the low block, which actually, from a Red Air point of view, gives them more of a challenge. So they haven't got to just look at azimuth-wise, all the jets are at 20,000 feet. So they've now got an elevation shoot because you've got a bunch of tornadoes down at low level. And actually, that's where the jet's at its happiest. As we mentioned before, it doesn't really like to be at 20,000 feet fully laden with weapons.
No.
It's actually pretty good and pretty quick down at low level. So we did all right, actually, in terms of those sort of tactics. But bearing in mind, the accuracy of the weapons isn't necessarily as good as, of course, laser-guided bombs that you would drop from 20,000 feet. So it was just a different way of doing business. And, life's moved on now, so you've got Typhoon clearly dropping from high level, but it's a different aircraft and a different sort of environment. But the planning process for Red Flag, the day before, we would have one of the 4-ship members would be one of our reps who would be in the plan, and they'd look at the target set. We'd get allocated the targets. and then it was up to us to execute on that target, and however we wish to, with the tactics that we wanted to do. Because of course, whilst red flag is an exercise, it's also training. So it gives us an opportunity to go and drop those bombs at night that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do in the UK. It also gives us an opportunity to try those tactics, see whether they're going to work or not against a realistic, incredible red air threat.
And was there GR4 at this point still a potent aircraft, and did other nations see it as a threat?
In terms of potency, as we've mentioned before, legging it around, going pretty quick at low level is very good at. In terms of weapon delivery, we would train hard in that environment to make sure that we could deliver 1,000-pounders with accuracy, shallow dive or high dive profiles, however we needed to. So I still think it was good at doing what it did and what it was designed for. Of course, that was all within the ROE of the particular conflict, right? So if we can run around and drop bombs willy-nilly, then actually we're pretty good at it. But when it comes to being more accurate and precise, then that's where your laser-guided weapons come in, and that's where you need to be pushing up at the medium level, which is where the airplane is not. It's not its home, really. So
yeah,
for years we tried to do a hybrid, I would say, where you've got a jet that's designed for the low-level environment, up in the medium level, and you know what, we did all right. It's a great aeroplane. I've been to war in it a few times, and it was, it keeps you safe. But is it the best aircraft out there, or was it the best aircraft out there? I would suggest probably not from that environment.
Yeah, was there many enviable glances from you lot looking at the Strike Eagles?
Oh well, I mean the panacea of the fighter world. The Strike Eagle that can and do everything. I mean, we were lucky enough when I was out in Red Flag that we worked with the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron the week prior to Red Flag, so we went out there a week early. And you would hang out in their bar, which is very much like, for your viewers, very much like the Top Gun bar in Top Gun 2.
Nice.
That's US, but US Air Force rather than US Navy. But very much like that. And we're swapping stories. They always wanted to come and have a look around the jet. Right. this mythical beast that was the Tornado. And of course we were like, we'll go and have a look at an F-15, and an F-15 is just another level. So yeah, it's fantastic aeroplane.
Yeah, so let's talk about a social scale. Obviously you mentioned there, but like when it would come to the flying, after a day's flying, would you switch off, or would you all socialise? Would you go to the bar, restaurant, or is it basically to bed ready for the next day?
So there's a large social aspect to any exercise, and indeed when we were at home as well. So the camaraderie on a squadron is something that I've never experienced since on any frontline squadron. So we would socialise as a collective, as a group, very regularly, like I say, both at home and away. And that could be, we'd either get together, go out for a meal, or if it was the weekend, we might go to the bar on a Friday night or whatever. But I mean, Lossiemouth back then, even notwithstanding Red Flag and the various places around the world we went, Lossiemouth was just heaving. So Friday night, you'd have your blue badges from 14 Squadron, you'd have your green badges from 12 Squadron, you'd have your red badges from 617 Squadron, and then you have the tartan ones from the OCU. And you couldn't move for people. It was such a sociable environment because of the camaraderie that we all shared, and that joint vision and that the way that we did business. It was absolutely phenomenal.
I'm guessing you went to Vegas. What was that like?
So Vegas is an interesting place.
Right.
I spent quite time in Vegas. So Red Flag was 3 weeks. We did 3 weeks in Flag, 2 weeks actually on the exercise a week beforehand. I've been out to something called Green Flag out there as well. Again, that's based out of Nellis, which is close air sport exercise. Yeah. So that's 3 weeks as well. So Vegas it can be exhausting because it's just busy, busy, busy. I guess it's like any city, depending on how much you get involved with it. But certainly by the end of week 2, you're kind of ready to come home.
Really?
The good thing about Vegas when we were there is we actually had a job to do, because there's not a huge amount to do during the day in Vegas.
And did you socialise just as like a squadron and RAF, or did you mix with the other nations, like going out having drinks, restaurants, meals, whatever?
So it was mixed. On Red Flag, I seem to remember we generally hung out as a squadron, mainly after we did the 422nd T&E week when we were hanging out with them. On the exercise itself, we generally hung out as a squadron. And when I did green flag, however, there was an F-16 squadron in town for that as well. So we were both doing this close air support exercise, and we'd actually socialised quite a lot with them. So yeah, it's mixed. I guess it just depends on probably mainly where you're living. Are you on base or are you off base? And also kind of the links that you might have with that squadron. So for example, with the F-16 squadron, we were all operating at the same building on the same wave time. So we got to know the guys pretty well.
Right, and yeah, before we wrap up this part on the flag, did you get told by the RAF to be on your best behaviour? Because I've heard some stories of people out there in Vegas, mainly F3 guys, where they got themselves into a bit of bother, or did you just know that already?
There were certainly some people that got themselves into bother, who should remain nameless, clearly. However, in general, you just don't want to let the side down, right? People will make mistakes, and that's just a normal part of life. Sometimes people take things too far and then they learn from them and then never do them again. So, for example, the first time I ever went to Arizona, so we used to go out to Arizona and do drop heavy weapons at a place called Davis Monthan Air Force Base. Yeah. The first time I ever went out there, I slept through my alarm. Okay, and it's my first exercise. I've been on the squadron for 6 weeks. I'm here to impress. Okay, I slept through my alarm because of the jet lag, and I screwed up the time zone change. Of course, the iPhones didn't exist, so there was no automatic update. I slept through the alarm, so I'm now waking up. The wheels have now gone, so I don't even know where I am. You know, I'm going to work out where I am on this base. But eventually, I find my way to work. To find my flight commander, then grabs hold of me by the scruff of the neck, you know, tears the strip off me, you know. And of course, did I ever miss wheels ever again in my entire RAF career? No. You miss it once and you learn from it. So people will make mistakes, but I would say that they generally learn from them.
Right, yeah. So, Chris, you also flew at Maple Flag. What was the differences from, Red Flag? Was it a different role there?
So very similar to Red Flag, but on a much smaller scale. So I would say it's about 50% of the size of Red Flag, pretty much. You'd have the same aggressive squadron, so the Nellis, the F-16s, F-15s from Nellis would come up and support that, but much smaller amount of aeroplanes there. But a very similar planning cycle, a very similar way of doing business. I think we had the Israelis there when I was there. We had I'm sure the French were there, I'm not sure. Canadians, obviously, the US, and us. And it was great. It was a bit more homely, if you like. It was a bit more because it's a smaller scale. So you've not got people living out in Vegas and coming back on to Nellis for a Red Flag on a daily basis. Everyone was kind of living pretty close by. And the Canadians were really, really good hosts in terms of hosting all of the nations. I think one evening we had to produce a British a British meal, and then you'd have the French doing the French thing and all that sort of stuff, and we'd all kind of do that sort of thing. So it was very sociable with the partner nations, definitely. But yeah, it's essentially, as far as I remember, very similar to Red Flag, but on a smaller scale.
And it was based out of Goose Bay, I'm guessing.
No, we were flying up Cold Lake, although I haven't been to Goose Bay many times. Goose Bay, we used to go to Goose Bay and do what's called operational low flying. So we would normally fly around the UK at 250 feet, so that was the minimum. There are three places in the UK where you can fly lower and you can fly down to 100 feet. And after having got, I think it was 250 hours on the aeroplane, you were allowed to do an OLF workup. So the idea being you could ingress to a target at 100 feet. Okay. You go to Goose Bay and in Labrador, and you've basically got nothing for hundreds of miles around. So we would go and do our operational low flying training there. So we go out, get everyone from Goose, and you could spend the entire time pretty much at 100 feet, and you'd have to pop up for the recovery and then land. So you could do hours worth of OLF, whereas in the UK you'd have to go, you're running up and down LFA 7, for example, 7 Tango in Wales, which is actually a pretty small area. I was out my first Goose Bay. I was not eligible to do operational low flying because I didn't have the hours. But we were out there with 3 squadrons, so Harrier squadron as it was at the time. And me being the junior guy, it's like, yeah, we're going to go and do some Harrier refill. This is going to be exciting. What does that look like? So you've got your 4 ships. So I think I'm number 4. The junior pilots sit at the back, stick search report, keep your mouth shut. and I've got these two Harriers that are going to go and bouncers. So we're going to go off and hit our target, and they're going to try and stop us hitting the target, basically. So they're our air threat. And I remember I was in 3-bag fit. So on the Tornado, you've got two different sorts of fuel tanks. So you've got your 1,500 litre tanks, the small ones, and you've got your 2250s, which are your big ones, which you would generally use for transits, because it obviously carries more fuel, but you're a lot less manoeuvrable with the big tanks on. For some unknown reason, I was in 3-bag fit, so I had two 1,500 litres under the wings and another one under the fuselage, so it's very fit basically. So I just had lots of gas that day. And I was the first one to run out of gas, so nobody else had 3 bags. So I'm getting chased down by this Harrier at one point, not really knowing what to do. So I'm split from the formation. They've gone, right? I'm never going to see them again. They're off to the target, and I'm running away from this Harrier. And the great thing about Goose as well is you could use afterburners over land, which you can't. You can only use that in the UK for safety reasons.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this Harrier's bearing down on me. And I'm thinking, like, I'm a junior guy, don't really know what I'm doing. I'm about to get shot down here, so I must preserve my my honour. So I put the burners in, and we've done accelerating out from 420 knots up to 550, which is the limit in at low level, with the wings all the way back. So I've turned myself into a lawn dart, and I'm going up the clappers now. And this Harrier is now disappearing in the mirror, which is great, because of course the Harrier can only do about 480 knots.
Yeah.
What of course I hadn't really envied is the amount of fuel that I'm getting through is significant, because I'm having to keep the burners in. So I put the burners in, take it out at 550 knots, speed slows down because I'm 3-bag fit, so I've got a lot of drag. Put the burners back in again. So back and forth with this Harrier. And I must have gone for about 50 miles in the wrong direction, at which point I've then realised that, we're running out of fuel now, I better get home. So not only did I not hit the target on that mission, I was the first one back. I had the most amount of fuel, was the first one back, but I didn't get shot down. So I don't know. Maybe that's a win.
That's a win in my book.
Exactly.
So overall, do you think the flag exercises are good for the RAF and type aircraft like the Tornado?
I think they're absolutely phenomenal. To be able to train against representative threats simulation with the F-16s and F-15s of the aggressor squadron, with the surface-to-air missiles systems that they have out there as well, is second to none. And the airspace, it's massive. Area 51's in the middle, but the Nellis training range that you can fly around it is huge. So not only you've got the threat replication, you've got the airspace, and also you've got interoperability that you just wouldn't get anywhere else, be that with the US, Canada, any other nation, Australia, for example. That is how you would go to war. I remember being on Op Southern Watch in Kuwait. So I did Southern Watch before I did Flag, and we did Flag, and it's like, this is exactly like Southern Watch.
Wow, really?
It was a great way of preparing people to go and do coalition operations.